Let's get straight into it with Kathryn Batte, women's football reporter for The Telegraph. Let's start from today backwards. Just before we were preparing to get on the podcast, Millie Bright has confirmed that she won't be at the Euros. She's withdrawn herself from selection, posting on her Instagram that essentially she's not in the right headspace and that although she'd love to, she just doesn't feel like she can. How shocked have you been with this news since it's come out?
Yeah, I wasn't as surprised as I would have been last week. I think we all kind of had we weren't sure, were we, when she posted that kind of statement with Rachel Daly in the podcast, kind of talking about why she'd withdrawn from the squad. And I'd started to get the feeling over the last couple of days, and Sarina Wiegman obviously was actually asked about it after the game, and she said the situation was the same. I'd started to get the impression that it was leaning towards more that she wasn't going to be going, as you know, from her own decision, not from not being picked or anything like that. Um, so, but naturally, when the news comes out, it's still like you still get a bit of a shock from it, and I think it's a shame. It's a real shame to lose, a character of, and a player of Millie's standing and somebody that had such a big influence on the dressing room, for her to not be there. I mean, a couple of weeks ago, she'd have been one of the first names, in the squad. And for now to her not be going, it is a shock. I think, like I say, maybe the impact of it was lessened slightly because we'd kind of known about some of the stuff that was going on previously, but you still get that sort of like initial sort of shock when you read the statement, despite whether the fact if you might have seen it coming or not.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think she seems to be like universally loved within the squad. She's obviously an incredible leader for club and country. I mean, again, a bit like we were talking about Mary Earps, this is obviously a very different situation. Fran Kirby, who we found out last night, announced her immediate retirement after we understand that she was told she wasn't going to be selected for this squad. We'll just talk about that decision in a moment, but it just feels like, I don't know, again, we talked about this with Mary Earps. I don't want to speculate, but this just feels like, and I want to emphasise, sorry, that these are all very individual cases, aren't they? They're all very different. But this feels like not good and like something perhaps a bit more general might be going on. As I say, I don't want to suggest anything, but the fact that this has all happened so close to the tournament and in basically the space of a week is a bit alarming, isn't it? It's kind of unusual.
Regardless of whether the fact of all three cases are individual and all have different reasons, it's three retire. Well, obviously Millie Bright hasn't announced a retirement yet, but three players, two retirements and one withdrawing themselves from selection is never going to reflect well on the culture of a squad, and it doesn't say good things about that kind of environment and maybe kind of what's going on inside it. And even if all of the other players are all kind of on board and together and everything like that, it still doesn't reflect well. And obviously, in Millie's case, she couldn't really have done anything after the tournament because she was specifically withdrawing herself from selection. But obviously, we'll come on to Fran in a minute. But there is still that argument, I guess, of even though she knew she wasn't going to be going to announce that kind of retirement, I'm sure kind of Sarina would have liked that to have come in maybe after the tournament, maybe in August. Obviously, it's Fran's decision as to when she does it, but naturally, it just creates a bit of a distraction because if Fran was just not picked, then it's a talking point on the day, but it's not kind of part of this free players sort of walking away what it feels like from the national team.
For Fran, then, do we think it sounds like she wanted to retire because she didn't want to be like a reserve? Because that can be the case, can't it? Because we were just talking about the squad. It's going to be announced tomorrow as we record on the Wednesday. That there is a possibility if there are injuries or issues that you can be called up, but she didn't want to be. Personally, Kathryn, I would have taken her. I know she's not at the peak of her powers, but I feel like she can still do things that other players can't. And she's had a very good season, I think, at Brighton, albeit not at the top level anymore with Chelsea. Personally, I think I would have taken her still. I'm not sure who I would have taken out when we look at a sort of 23-player squad. What are your thoughts?
I think the most puzzling thing about this whole thing for me was that she wasn't going to be named in the squad because I don't know who
Hmm.
gets in ahead of her in that midfield bracket. And I know it's a bit complicated because essentially Fran Kirby's a number 10 and you've got Ella Toone, you've got Jess Park and Grace Clinton, who can both play there, can sometimes play. They can sometimes play those deeper midfield roles as well. And you've got Laura James who can play there as well if she's fit. However, we never really see her play in that role for England very often. So maybe Sarina's gone, well, I've got too many players that can play in number 10. So in that midfielder bracket, I'm going to take somebody that can play in the deeper position. And is that why we saw Missy Beaucairns come on at half time yesterday to give her a bit of experience? And she thinks, I'm going to take a younger player who's going to get experience of going to a tournament who might not play because maybe, you take Fran, realistically, she's not going to start and she might not necessarily come off the bench either, but she would go and maybe not play at all. And maybe Sarina's thinking, well, it's better to take a younger player in a deeper midfield position and her not play, and she'll be all right with that, rather than take a Fran who is more of a number 10 who I'm quite well stocked in that area.
Hmm.
And she's not going to get anything necessarily out of the experience of going and not playing. So I can kind of see it from that point of view. However, I actually think because Clinton and Park can play in those deeper midfield positions, I would have taken Kirby over anybody else who's going to come into that midfield bracket with the players I've just mentioned, just because Ella Toon's had a calf injury this season and she's had tightness in her calf the last couple of weeks. You don't know necessarily if she's going to definitely be okay. Obviously, we hope she is. Anyone could get injured realistically. And it's funny you mentioned about the reserve. So Sarina was asked after the game last night if she'd asked Fran to go on standby or if she wanted her to go on standby. And Sarina really, really bluntly just said that's not relevant. But it was actually a perfectly relevant question. I won't say
Mm.
who asked it because I don't want to kind of drop them in it, but I thought it was a bit rude the way she responded to him actually. But it's not relevant. It's a perfectly relevant question to ask because somebody could get injured tomorrow. And suddenly we don't have any other number 10s to fill in if Fran Kirby's not on the reserve list, because the other kind of midfield options, Laura Blinkill-Brown again, is more of a deeper midfield player. So I do think it's a shame in that respect. And I also think it's strange that Sarina had that conversation with Fran before the last game, because what if Ella Toon or Jess Parker had got injured last night? Because
Mm.
Serena kind of hinted at that, obviously, like maybe things could have changed, but she'd said to her at that point, maybe Fran's asked for clarity, and she said, I want to know what are my chances, and Serena's been honest with her. Potentially that's how it went down. But for me, I kind of felt like if you weren't 100% sure, if someone could get injured in that last game, it was surprising for me that you would tell somebody they're not going because then they've just mentally checked out of that match. And obviously, Fran
Mm.
wasn't part of the squad last night, so was never going to come on to change Serena's mind.
So generally, what do we think? Everyone knows who listens to this pod my feelings towards Sarina Wiegman, and I'm loath to have anyone criticise her. I just wonder what we praised about her when she first came in, her ruthlessness, her clarity, her bluntness. I just wonder if that's, I don't want to say not working anymore or not a good quality to have. It's just having not maybe the same effect as it did when she first came in.
I think when somebody comes into an environment and they're new, because they're changing everything, I think people always embrace change. I think most of the time, and you think about kind of how England were under Phil Neville, they were ready for a change. Then they had Hegarisa, and that didn't go very well either. And they were ready for somebody to come in and kind of change everything, disrupt it, and everyone is usually going to embrace that. And so it's all kind of new, and they all think, yeah, this is brilliant. But when somebody's been there for a long period of time and it's the same thing, and maybe if they're not evolving themselves a little bit as well, people can get sick of the same thing. So while everyone loved the fact that Sarina was honest with everyone and everyone knew their roles going into the Euros and she was direct and she didn't beat around the bush, now if it's not necessarily going their way, I think maybe it's not as great as it was kind of 3 years ago. And it's interesting with, I always think with managers that kind of have that longevity and can stay at the same club, for example, or national team for a long period of time and make it work. I think it's quite rare in modern football now that we see
Mm.
somebody there for such a long period of time. Um, and essentially the players not get sick of them because it is a very difficult job to kind of keep everybody happy. And I think maybe Serena's kind of lost that a little bit in terms of keeping players involved. We always mentioned the kind of Emma Hayes when she was at Chelsea. She had such a big squad to manage, and trying to keep them all happy was impossible. but everyone kind of still felt involved. And I wonder sometimes if those players that maybe know they're not going to play, how involved do they feel in the environment? Because at the Euros, everyone looked like they were involved, and it was all very much a big kind of squad togetherness. And even at the World Cup, I think to a certain extent it was the same thing. I feel like since the World Cup, it's not really felt like that. I think it's not quite felt the same for whatever reason.
Do we think that the Lionesses now lack that bit of leadership experience? Thank goodness we have Lucy Bronze there still, Leah Williamson, of course. Just trying to think, Georgia Stanway, Keira Walsh. So there's a decent number there. It's just in those key areas now, it's just a bit of a concern.
Yeah, I think the weird thing is all these free kind of players not being around. England can get by until there's an injury or a suspension. So Marriott's retiring is fine until Hannah Hampton gets injured or sent off. Millie Bright not being around is okay until one of Alex Greenwood or Leah Williamson, who we assume will be the starting centre backs. If one of them gets injured, then you're putting in somebody like Esme Morgan, who hasn't got as many caps as somebody like Millie Bright, who could have come in if she was there. Fran Kirby going again is fine, unless somebody like Ella Toone or Jess Park gets injured, and then you're trying to fill a void. So it's not like I think England are going to miss these three players hugely in the sense of because they can't replace them, because they can at the minute, but it's if they lose anybody else, suddenly, you've got a lack of depth there. And in terms of the leadership, like losing Millie Bright, I do think is really, really big. But there's some of the names you just mentioned, Alex Greenwood as well as I think
Yeah.
on about 80 something caps, Williamson, bronze. There's still some really big leaders in that dressing room that are going to have to kind of step up to the plate and help some of the younger players in that team who are maybe had maybe leaned on the likes of Millie or Mary in the past. I do hope they really support Hannah Hampton, because I think she made a brilliant save last night early on. There was the second goal, I felt she maybe could have come and collected the cross, but just generally I hope they kind of support her as the number one, because I think she does need that extra support. Maybe somebody just to put an arm around her, because there's gonna be so much spotlight on her now after everything that's happened with Mary Earps. And I do think she's a brilliant goalkeeper, but as soon as she makes any hint of a mistake, at the Euros, there's going to be focus on her, and I just hope they kind of get around her and are supportive of her, and that she feels supported within the team.
Yeah, I'm sure she will, as you say. She's got a lot of teammates there as well from her club. Final thing I wanted to talk about actually was Sarina Wiegman's reaction to these three withdrawals. So we don't know about Millie Bright. I'm certain she'll be extremely sympathetic, and that actually she probably knew last night about Millie Bright's decision, and I'm sure she will. She obviously, the Fran Kirby one was sort of positive and about her career, and thanked her very much, very effusive in that. I mean, that was kind of because I guess she kind of maybe saw it coming because of Fran's, it was her decision not to select her. Mary Earps, though, I mean, we haven't spoken actually. The last time we spoke, you hadn't heard from Sarina Wiegman in the press conference, had you? And how do you felt she played that one?
Played it down. I think she rather than pouring petrol on the flames, she tried to kind of put the fire out. I think she realised, and this is kind of what we alluded to when we discussed it. She realised there's nothing really in it for her to sort of cause more of a reaction or cause a stir by saying something particularly negative. She was never going to really go into detail about those conversations, and I think you could tell she was disappointed with her mannerisms and kind of what she was saying, but she was obviously quite kind of neutral generally when she was talking about it.
So we had a massive win against Portugal, 6-0 on the Friday night, before last night's 2-1 defeat to Spain. I'm generally fairly optimistic, Kathryn. I'm going to tell you a few things I really liked about this. First of all, Alessia Russo's goal. I don't know about you being in the stadium, but when I was watching on telly, gorgeous ball from Keira Walsh, a real textbook trademark ball from her. And you know what? As soon as Russo got in behind, I was like, she's scoring this. And that's not how I felt even at the beginning of the season. But her form is incredible, and I felt that just watching at home.
Yeah, I think she's peaking at the right time, Russo, and I think for Arsenal since Renee Slagers took over, I think she's just gone from strength to strength in terms of her confidence in front of goal. I mean, it helped that Irene Paredes is very slow, and I don't know why they didn't get Lauren Hemp running at her more often because that was kind of the battle I really wanted to see. But as soon as Walsh played that ball in behind, there was no way Russo was going to lose that race, and obviously another fantastic finish. And it felt a little bit like a smash and grab in the first half because it had been very much Spain dominating possession as we expected, but that was kind of a sign of what England can do, when they're at their best.
So again, I'm being optimistic, and the second half was, I mean, Spain were totally dominant, but Georgia Stanway went off after a good first half, good 45 minutes in her legs. Missy Beaukern's coming on for her debut. I mean, oof, that is a tough game to come into for your debut. A lot of changes made, Lucy Bronze coming off, and a few others. So I was like, you know what, we've got a less experienced team on the pitch now. But it was so one-sided, wasn't it? Really, that second half.
Yeah, and I think it shows how reliant England are on the likes of Lucy Bronze and Georgia Stanway as well. You mentioned Missy Beaucaire. It felt like a baptism of fire to
Yeah,
kind of throw her in against the world champions for her debut, having obviously not played for the Lionesses before. And Jess Carter coming on at right back was interesting because we know she generally plays centre back at club level. Played left back on Friday. I didn't think that said many great things from Maya Letizier, who's obviously seen as a right back for England, that Jess Carter kind of came on ahead of her. Um, and obviously Claudia Pina kind of changed the game for Spain. I couldn't believe that she didn't start. I know there's that kind of battle at Barcelona of her and Salma Paralelu as kind of which player. I've probably pronounced that wrong, but I'm sure you know how to pronounce her
I
name
know.
better
I
than me.
find I found that one really hard. I'm
Oh,
gonna have
did
to
you? Oh,
practice. It's
yeah,
really hard.
between probably not how I pronounced it. There's a battle between the two of them as to which one starts, and I just think Pina is, a fantastic player and really, again, as soon as she came on, she was just ran at England and taking shots on and actually
Mm.
getting them on target. Whereas Spain had taken a lot of shots and kind of getting them off target before that. And yeah, I think the worrying thing was that it kind of highlighted England's lack of quality in reserve, like the lack of depth. Is that when you take Bronze off, if we're in a situation at the Euros, hopefully it doesn't happen where Bronze gets an injury or gets sent off or something like that. You kind of feel like, we saw it against Portugal in February when she went off, it kind of fell to pieces. Um, I think losing someone of Stanway, even though she's only not quite fully fit yet, losing her experience in the midfield, just that
Mm.
concentration. When Spain have got so much of the ball, you've got to be like 100% concentrated, and I think England just lost that a little bit in the second half. Um, but had they kept a full strength team on, they could easily have gone on to win the game.
I think so, because also actually in the first half, again, Spain were pretty dominant, but I felt England were pretty good defensively, like really concentrating, and they managed. I thought they pretty confidently absorbed all that pressure. So I was like, I'm okay with this actually, and we'll get a chance. And then Alessia Russo does that. So yeah, I think we can be quite optimistic. The other thing is, I mean, again, Lauren James feel like in that sort of game she can win a foul, can't she, or keep the ball maybe a little bit better. So it's those sort of options. I think the big story from this Portugal game was a Wembley hat trick for Aggie Beever-Jones. Great for her, and yeah, some really good finishes. She's had a really great season, hasn't she? I just wonder if she's going to be the Alessia Russo of the last Euros, and whether you feel like she could fulfil that role as the impact sub.
I think so. And I think that's the one position now where I think England actually have got quality in reserve. I think that kind of forward area, it's sort of the other positions that I'm more concerned about. But I think Aggie Beever-Jones now having, scoring that hat trick at Wembley will do like wonders for her confidence. And we've seen her be an impact sub for Chelsea before. It was kind of her role last season, in which she did very well. And I think that will be. It was interesting. Sarina was asked before the game if she'd considered sort of starting Beever-Jones ahead of Russo in classic Sarina style. She just said no, and I mean it's sort of like we know Russo is the starter, kind of regardless of that. And obviously she's had a brilliant season, but to have a player of Beever-Jones who can come on maybe when Russo's getting a bit tired, or to just kind of freshen things up later in the game, it is a great option to have.
Absolutely. So, just to round up, the squad is going to be announced tomorrow. That's Thursday, June the 5th. I think we're fairly certain, aren't we? Although the Bright news maybe throws a bit of a spanner in the works for you. So we think, I mean, the goalkeepers, you think it's going to be Hampton, Keating, Morehouse. Defenders, I mean, Wubben-Moy, I guess, would be she's replaced Brighton in the team. Did she get any minutes actually over this international break? No.
No, she didn't. I was wondering before kind of whether Letizia would definitely go if Bright was fit, just because of the fact that Carter would come on at right back, and obviously she can't seem to get in at centre back. However, now Bright's not going, I think Letizia will go. And yeah, it's whether she takes an extra defender and has Wubben Moy there, or whether she brings in a Paris and Adjumang. Neither of them coming on in this camp says to me that they're probably not going to be in the squad. But I guess Sarina could throw in a surprise by naming one of them and taking an extra forward. But I'd be surprised. I mean, and now given Kearns came on at half time yesterday, I'm assuming now she's going to be in the squad, which I like. If you'd asked me a week ago, I would have said, absolutely not. Like, not to be kind of critical, just to be. She'd never played for England before,
No,
and she's
no, I
not
think
really
that's
been in the
fair.
squad. And it's just kind of she's sort of come out of nowhere as this option in midfield, and I'd be surprised now, given that she came on, if she wasn't part of the 23 players going.
Yeah. So I think that's the one in midfield, isn't it? So you got sort of Clinton, Park, Stanway, Toon, and Walsh. Because yeah, you kind of do need that extra sort of, as you say, deeper lying midfielder there, probably, don't you? And yeah, do you take? I mean, I think she's going to name Lauren James will be in the squad, won't she? I just there's no way she's not in until the last possible minute. And I think as discussed in other forums that she might even be our sort of Luke Shaw almost, although much better, obviously, more skillful. That it maybe she won't be fit for the first couple or even the group stages, but she'll be there. And she's worth it, isn't she? She's worth the risk. She's the one player probably is.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think um, rather than putting somebody else, the chance of having Lauren James fit for, however much of the tournament is better than taking somebody who's not going to play but will be fit for all of the games, like just to have the possibility of James in the squad. And Sarina's sounded, every time she's been asked about it, she's sounded kind of quietly optimistic that she's going to be all right. So I think she'll be in the squad, and then hopefully, she could be fit for some part of the group stage.
So we now pause until the final warm up game. I mean, it's been. You said on on the WhatsApp that you were that Antonio Conte quote that actually didn't happen, weren't you?
Yeah, just one normal week of Lionesses. One normal day would be fine. Never
Will
happen.
never happen. But I guess you're hoping between now and maybe a little bit towards the end of the next break. Anyway, there'll be a bit. But I mean, kind of, what are your feelings after all these big announcements and stuff? How are you feeling?
It's weird. It's just such a weird camp. It was a camp where the football just took sort of a back seat, really. Everything was about what was going on off the pitch, and I'm sure Sarina will want to get back to kind of focusing on the actual football. And hopefully nobody else decides to drop out or retire in this space of the next couple of weeks, because I'm not sure we can afford any more.